Have you ever made a decision so disastrous, so instantaneously regretful, that you wished you could simply phase through the matter of your bedsheets, drift through the floorboards, and bury yourself in the earth's crust like a fossil from a bygone era? Because that is exactly where I found myself last Tuesday night, in a situation that I can only describe as a comedic tragedy of biological proportions that ruined not only the mood, but possibly my ability to look at frozen desserts ever again. It all started with what was supposed to be the perfect romantic evening, the kind you see in montages where the lighting is low, the music is smooth jazz or some lo-fi beat that screams relaxation, and the vibes are immaculate. But as we all know, the universe has a funny way of balancing out perfection with absolute chaos, and my chaos came in the form of a spontaneous, ill-advised decision to explore uncharted territory without looking at the map first. My boyfriend, let's call him Dave, is usually a very practical guy, the kind of person who reads the manual before assembling IKEA furniture and checks the weather app before leaving the house. But for some reason, on this specific night, both of us decided to throw caution, logic, and basic biology out the window in favor of living in the moment, a phrase that I am now convinced is just code for making a huge mistake that you will cringe about for the next 10 years. We had gone out for dinner earlier that evening to this new Mexican fusion place downtown, which, in hindsight, was the first domino to fall in this cascade of failure, because while the spicy beef burritos and the extra beans were delicious at the time, they were essentially a ticking time bomb waiting to sabotage my dignity, but at that moment, blissfully unaware of the gastrointestinal treason happening inside me. We went back to his place feeling great, maybe a little too full, but definitely in the mood to take things to the bedroom. We started doing the usual stuff, the vanilla playlist of romance. Everything was going fine, standard operating procedure, until the atmosphere started getting a little more intense, and the idea of switching things up came into play, specifically the idea of trying the back door, a generic term for an act that requires a level of preparation, planning, and clearance that we simply did not have. But in the heat of the moment, with hormones firing on all cylinders, your brain tends to ignore the red flashing warning lights that say, "Stop, turn back, danger ahead." So when he whispered, "Should we try it?" instead of pausing to calculate the risks or run a diagnostic on my internal status, I just nodded and said, "Sure, why not?" A phrase that should be etched onto my tombstone. Now, for anyone watching who doesn't know, there is a golden rule for this specific activity, a rule that is more important than gravity, and that rule is prep is key. You cannot just knock on the back door and expect the house to be clean if you haven't tidied up, especially after a 3-course meal involving legumes and hot sauce. But we were young, we were foolish, and we were caught up in the romance of spontaneity, assuming that real life works like the movies where people just effortlessly transition into these things without any consequences. We shifted positions, and the lighting in the room was dim, specifically that warm, romantic amber hue that hides imperfections, which I used to think was a blessing, but now I realize was actually a curse because it gave us a false sense of security, making us think everything was sleek and sexy, when in reality, we were playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded biological weapon. The process began, and at first, everything seemed okay. There was the usual awkwardness of trying something new, the adjustments, the "is this okay" check-ins, and for a solid minute or two, I thought we were going to get away with it. I thought I was one of the chosen few who could bypass the prep stage and emerge victorious, a champion of spontaneity, but life comes at you fast. And sometimes it comes at you with a smell that defies description. We were in the middle of the act, the intensity was building, and then, inevitably, because physics and friction exist, he decided to pull out, presumably to switch things up again, or maybe just to take a breather. And this is the moment where time seemed to slow down, where the simulation glitched, and where my soul decided it wanted to leave my body. As he withdrew his instrument, the dim lighting that I mentioned earlier played a cruel trick on us because at first, I didn't see anything. I just felt a sudden shift in the air pressure, a heavy, ominous silence that fell over the room like a wet blanket. But then Dave paused, freezing mid-motion like a statue, and I heard him make a sound that wasn't quite a gasp and wasn't quite a gag, but something horribly in between. A guttural noise of pure realization. I looked back, squinting through the darkness, and that's when the smell hit me. It wasn't a gradual waft, it was a punch to the face, a wall of odor that was so potent, so distinct, and so absolutely unromantic that it felt like the walls of the bedroom were peeling away. replacing the sexy atmosphere with the ambience of a biohazard containment unit. Confused and horrified, I turned on the bedside lamp, which was the second worst decision of the night, because the sudden illumination revealed the catastrophe in 4K resolution, highlighting exactly what had happened during our spontaneous adventure. There, in the harsh light of the LED bulb, was Dave, looking down at his equipment with a face that expressed a mix of confusion, betrayal, and sorrow, because what was once a pristine instrument of romance was now coated, covered, and completely encased in a substance that looked exactly, and I mean exactly, like a chocolate popsicle that had been dipped in a fondue fountain, a thick, dark, textured layer of what we shall politely call organic waste that had been extracted from the depths of the spicy burrito factory. The silence that followed was louder than any scream, a vacuum of sound where the only thing existing was the visual of the chocolate popsicle and the smell, oh God, the smell, which was rapidly filling the room, mixing with the expensive cologne he was wearing to create a scent profile that I can only describe as eau de sewer. I wanted to say something cool, something to diffuse the tension, maybe a joke or a reassuring comment, but my brain had completely short-circuited, leaving me staring at the disaster with my mouth open, realizing that the romantic evening wasn't just dead, it had been murdered, buried, and desecrated by the lack of preparation. Dave, bless his heart, didn't get angry. He didn't yell. He just stood there holding his popsicle away from his body like it was a piece of radioactive uranium that might explode if he moved too fast, his eyes meeting mine with a look of shared trauma that said, "We are never speaking of this, but we will never forget it." The sheer volume of the mess was baffling. It wasn't just a streak or a smudge, which would have been bad enough. It was a full coverage situation, a total eclipse of the skin, suggesting that we had unknowingly tapped into a reserve that had been waiting for this exact moment to make its escape. I scrambled backward, pulling the sheet up to cover myself, though the damage was already done. The magic of the moment had been replaced by the harsh reality of biology, and the only thing left to do is damage control. But even that felt impossible because where do you even start when the love of your life is standing there looking like he just performed surgery in a mud pit? We stood there for what felt like an eternity, trapped in a silent standoff between romance and reality, staring at the catastrophic aftermath of our poor decision-making skills while the air in the room grew heavy with the undeniable scent of regret, and I remember thinking that if a meteor were to strike the building right at that second, I would honestly welcome the sweet release of extinction rather than face the next 5 minutes of my life. Dave finally broke the paralysis, letting out a long, shaky exhale that sounded like a deflating tire, and carefully stepped off the bed, moving with a slow, deliberate caution of a bomb disposal technician trying not to trigger a secondary explosion. Because one wrong move, one sudden jerk, and the chocolate coating could drip onto the carpet, which was a beige, deep pile shag that would never, ever forgive us for such a transgression. He began the slow, humiliating waddle toward the bathroom, a walk that is universally recognized as the penguin shuffle of shame, keeping his knees together and his hips rigid while holding his hands out for balance, looking like a man trying to transport a brimming cup of hot soup across a tightrope, and I watched him go, feeling a mix of profound pity and hysterical laughter bubbling up in my chest, a defense mechanism my brain was deploying to keep me from crying. The bathroom door clicked shut, and the sound of the lock turning was the most final sound I have ever heard, a clear signal that the intimate portion of the evening had been officially canceled and replaced with a hazmat cleanup operation, leaving me alone in the bedroom with the secondary victim of our negligence, the bedsheets. I turned my head slowly, terrified of what I would find, and looked down at the mattress where the incident had occurred, hoping against hope that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't as bad as I thought. But of course, the universe does not grant mercy in situations like these. The sheets, which were a pristine, high-thread count white cotton that Dave had probably bought specifically to impress me, were now the canvas for a piece of abstract art that no gallery would ever display, a smeared, chaotic Rorschach test of brown destruction that clearly marked the blast zone, and the worst part was that it wasn't just on the top sheet. Oh no, it had soaked through to the fitted sheet and, judging by the size of the calamity, had likely compromised the mattress protector, and possibly the soul of the mattress itself. I sat there, frozen, listening to the sound of the shower turning on in the next room, the aggressive rushing of water indicating that Dave was currently scrubbing himself with the intensity of someone trying to erase a memory, and I realized that I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there in the crime scene waiting for him to return. I had to be proactive. I had to mitigate the damage. I sprang into action, or rather, I cautiously rolled out of bed to avoid the danger zone, and frantically started looking for supplies, grabbing a box of tissues, a bottle of water, and a stray sock that was on the floor, thinking I could perform some kind of emergency spot cleaning. But as soon as I got close to the stain, the smell hit me again, a second wave of olfactory assault that made my eyes water and my stomach do a backflip. It was hopeless. You cannot simply tissue away a disaster of this magnitude. This required industrial machinery, bleach, and perhaps an exorcism. So I decided that the only option was to strip the bed, to hide the evidence, to bundle everything up into a ball of shame and shove it into the washing machine before Dave came back, so we could pretend that the bed was never involved, that this was just a localized biological failure and not a full-scale environmental crisis. I ripped the sheets off the corners, moving with the frantic energy of a criminal trying to clean up before the police arrive, wadding the fabric up into a tight, heavy bundle, trying not to look directly at the soiled areas, trying not to breathe through my nose, and sprinted, naked, might I add, out of the bedroom and down the hallway to the laundry closet, praying that his roommates weren't home. Because if anyone had walked out at that moment and seen me streaking through the apartment, clutching a ball of brown-stained linens while smelling like a portable toilet at a music festival, I would have had to fake my own death and move to another continent. I reached the washing machine, threw the door open, and shoved the entire bundle inside, not even checking for color separation or temperature settings, just dumping a lethal amount of detergent into the tray, pressing heavy-duty, and hitting start with the force of a desperate woman. As the machine whirred to life, locking the door and sealing the evidence away in a watery tomb, I leaned back against the wall and slid down to the floor, catching my breath, thinking that maybe, just maybe, we could salvage the night, or at least salvage our dignity. But then I realized that I still hadn't checked on Dave, and for all I knew, he was currently slipping down the drain or drowning in his own embarrassment. I walked to the bathroom door and knocked softly, asking, "Are you okay in there?" A question that felt incredibly stupid given the circumstances, but I didn't know what else to say. The water stopped running, there was a long pause, and then I heard his voice, muffled by the door, sounding defeated and hollow, saying, "I think I need a new towel," which was a code, a polite way of saying that the towel he had used was now a casualty of war and could strictly never be used for drying a human face again. I ran to the linen closet, grabbed a fresh, fluffy towel, and cracked the door open just an inch to hand it to him, catching a glimpse of the steam-filled room which now smelled like a confusing mixture of tropical breeze body wash and the lingering ghost of the burrito incident, a sensory clash that was truly disorienting. He took the towel with a mumbled thanks, and I quickly shut the door, giving him his privacy, retreating back to the bedroom which now looked barren and sad without its sheets, just a bare mattress exposing its naked vulnerability to the world, and I stood there shivering, not just from the cold but from the sheer awkwardness of the situation, wondering how we were supposed to transition from sexy time to let's sit on the bare mattress and discuss the weather. I decided to put on some clothes, because being naked felt too vulnerable, too exposed, so I threw on one of his oversized t-shirts and a pair of sweatpants, transforming myself from a seductress into a cozy potato, which felt much more appropriate for the current vibe. When Dave finally emerged from the bathroom, he looked scrubbed raw, his skin pink from what I assumed was scalding hot water and aggressive exfoliation, and he was wrapped in the fresh towel, avoiding eye contact as he walked into the room. He looked at the bed, noticed the missing sheets, and then looked at me, a flicker of gratitude crossing his face when he realized I had dealt with the laundry, sparing him the horror of having to handle the soiled linens himself. "I put them in the wash," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room, heavy cycle, extra rinse, and he just nodded, letting out a small, breathless laugh that lacked any real humor, more of a release of tension than anything else. "I'm sorry," he said, sitting down on the edge of the mattress. "I honestly don't know what happened. I thought we were good, and I immediately rushed to reassure him, sitting next to him and putting a hand on his back, saying it's fine, really it happens, biology is weird, channeling my inner therapist even though inside I was screaming. We sat there in silence for a few minutes, the air conditioning humming, the washing machine thumping rhythmically in the distance like a heartbeat, and I thought that maybe the worst was over, that we had survived the peak of the trauma. But then Dave turned to me with a look of sudden panic and asked, "Wait, did you check the mattress protector?" And my heart dropped into my stomach because in my haste to strip the bed, I hadn't actually checked if the chocolate had seeped through the sheets onto the expensive memory foam underneath. We both slowly stood up and turned to look at the bare mattress, and there, right in the center, like a target painted on the ground, was a faint but undeniable brownish halo, a stain that had bypassed the defenses of the cotton sheets and marked its territory on the foam. It wasn't a solid disaster like the sheets, but it was there, a ghost of the incident, a permanent reminder that would be there every time we changed the linens, every time we slept, a cursed stamp of disapproval from the universe. Dave groaned, putting his face in his hands, muttering that cost $2,000, and I bit my lip, trying to think of a solution, wondering if baking soda and vinegar could lift a stain of this nature, or if we would just have to flip the mattress and pretend the underside was the new top. "We can clean it," I said, trying to sound optimistic. "I'll Google it, there are hacks for this." And I grabbed my phone, typing in how to remove biological stains from memory foam, which is a search history entry that I'm sure put me on some kind of government watch list. But desperate times call for desperate measures. The search results were a mix of helpful advice and horror stories from people in similar situations, suggesting everything from enzyme cleaners to simply burning the house down. But we settled on a mixture of dish soap, water, and aggressive blotting. So for the next 30 minutes, instead of cuddling or basking in the afterglow, we were on our hands and knees, scrubbing a mattress with a toothbrush and a bowl of soapy water, sweating and panting, but not in the fun way. The romance was so dead it was practically decomposing, replaced by a shared labor that felt more like a punishment detail in a prison camp than a date night. We worked in silence, the rhythm of the scrubbing brush the only sound, until finally the stain began to fade, retreating into the foam, leaving behind a wet, soapy patch that smelled like lemon detergent and failure. We sat back on our heels, exhausted, looking at our handiwork, and while the visual evidence was mostly gone, the psychological scar remained, glowing neon in our minds. "Well," Dave said, wiping sweat from his forehead, "that's better," and I nodded, saying, "Yeah, good as new," which was a lie, but a necessary one. We couldn't put sheets back on because the mattress was wet, and we couldn't sleep on a wet mattress, so we were displaced, refugees in his own apartment, forced to relocate to the living room couch, which was a leather two-seater that was definitely not designed for two grown adults to sleep on comfortably. We grabbed some spare blankets from the closet and set up a makeshift camp in the living room, trying to make the best of it, trying to reclaim some semblance of normalcy, but as we laid there, squeezed together on the narrow leather cushions, limbs tangled not in passion but in a desperate attempt to not fall off the edge, I couldn't help but replay the image of the popsicle in my mind, the way the light hit it, the texture, the sheer volume of it, and I just knew, that every time I saw a chocolate ice cream bar for the rest of my life, I would have a war flashback. We tried to watch a movie to distract ourselves, putting on some mindless action flick, but every time there was a mudslide or a scene involving dirt, we both tensed up, the trauma still too fresh, too raw. I drifted off to sleep eventually, dreaming of endless fields of white lilies and sterile hospital rooms, only to wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of the washing machine beeping, signaling that the load was done, and for a second, in the haze of sleep, I forgot where I was and what had happened, until I tried to roll over and nearly fell onto the floor, realizing I was clinging to a leather couch cushion. I got up to switch the laundry to the dryer, walking through the dark apartment like a ghost, and as I passed the bedroom door, the smell caught me again, faint now, mostly masked by the lemon soap, but still lingering in the background like a bad memory, and I knew that we would need to buy candles, lots of candles, maybe some sage to smudge the room, anything to spiritually cleanse the space. I tossed the wet sheets into the dryer, the heat blasting my face, and stood there in the dark laundry room, laughing quietly to myself, a manic, sleep-deprived giggle, thinking about how we had wanted to spice things up and had ended up scorching the earth. The next morning was awkward, to say the least, waking up with stiff necks on the couch, the sun streaming in to illuminate our makeshift refugee camp. We woke up like two rusty folding chairs that had been left out in the rain, unfolding our limbs with a series of clicks, pops, and groans that sounded less like a young couple in their prime and more like a retirement home aerobics class. Because sleeping on a leather couch that is designed for sitting and looking expensive rather than actual. Human rest is a form of torture that should be outlawed by the Geneva Convention. The morning sun was streaming through the blinds, casting stripes of light across the room that felt aggressively cheerful, mocking the dark cloud of shame that was hanging over our heads. And for the first few seconds of consciousness, there was that beautiful, blissful ignorance where you don't remember the trauma of the night before. But then I looked at Dave, whose hair was sticking up in 17 different directions and who had a pattern of leather grain imprinted on his cheek. And the memories came flooding back like a tidal wave of cringe. The popsicle, the smell, the scrubbing, the damp mattress, it all hit me at once, and I had to physically suppress the urge to pull the blanket over my head and scream into the void until I passed out again. Dave opened one eye, looked at me, then looked at the ceiling, and I could practically hear his internal monologue rebooting, processing the data, and arriving at the same horrifying conclusion that I had, because he let out a sigh that was so heavy it practically vibrated the floorboards. "Morning," he croaked, his voice sounding like he had swallowed a handful of gravel, and I replied with a morning that was equally dry and brittle, neither of us daring to mention the elephant in the room, or rather, the chocolate factory that had exploded in the bedroom. We extricated ourselves from the tangle of blankets, moving with the awkward stiffness of strangers who had just met, which was bizarre considering we had been dating for over a year. But there is something about a biological disaster that resets the intimacy clock back to zero, forcing you to relearn how to be around each other without picturing the unspeakable. "Coffee?" he asked, and I nodded enthusiastically because I needed caffeine to jumpstart my heart and hopefully drown out the memory of the previous night. But as we walked into the kitchen, the air felt different, charged with a weird tension where every movement felt scrutinized. I watched him fill the kettle, noticing how he was avoiding looking at the hallway that led to the bedroom, treating that entire sector of the apartment like it was a radioactive exclusion zone, and I didn't blame him because I was doing the exact same thing, keeping my eyes strictly focused on the neutral territory of the kitchen island. As the water boiled, the silence stretched out, thin and taut, and I realized that we couldn't just stay here. We couldn't sit in this apartment and sip coffee while the ghost of the burrito incident haunted us from down the hall. We needed to evacuate. We needed fresh air. We needed to be around people who didn't know that we had spent our Saturday night scrubbing a mattress with dish soap. "Let's go out," I blurted out suddenly, surprising even myself. "Let's go get breakfast, like actual breakfast, pancakes or something, not here." And Dave looked at me with immense relief, his shoulders dropping 2 inches as he agreed immediately, probably grateful for the excuse to escape the crime scene. We got dressed in record time, avoiding the bedroom as much as possible, grabbing clothes from the pile on the floor and changing in the living room like fugitives on the run, and within 10 minutes we were out the door and walking down the street, inhaling the fresh morning air like it was the elixir of life. The city was waking up, people were walking their dogs, joggers were sweating past us, and for a moment I felt normal. I felt like a regular person who hadn't participated in a hazardous waste event, but then my brain started playing tricks on me, making me paranoid that somehow everyone knew. I felt like I had a neon sign floating above my head that said, "Ask me about the popsicle," and every time a stranger made eye contact with me, I quickly looked away, convinced that they could smell the shame on me, even though I had showered and applied enough perfume to fumigate a department store. We arrived at our favorite diner, a cozy spot with red vinyl booths and the smell of frying bacon, which usually makes me happy, but today my stomach was doing somersaults, caught between hunger and a lingering nausea from the trauma. We sat down, and the waitress came over with menus, smiling a bright, customer service smile that felt blindingly wholesome compared to the dark reality of my life, and she asked, "How are you folks doing today?" To which Dave replied, "Great, thanks. lying through his teeth with the ease of a sociopath, while I just nodded and buried my face in the menu. And then, the universe decided to test me to see if I had truly recovered, because as I scanned the breakfast options, my eyes landed on the decadent chocolate waffle tower, described as fluffy waffles smothered in rich chocolate sauce and topped with chocolate shavings, and I swear I felt my throat close up. The mental image that description conjured was so vivid, so visceral, that I actually gagged a little, a small hook sound that made Dave look up from his menu with alarm. "You okay?" he asked, and I pointed a shaking finger at the menu item, whispering, I can't look at it." And he followed my finger, read the description, and his face went pale, a look of shared PTSD washing over him as he quickly closed his menu and pushed it away. "Right," he said, clearing his throat. "Savory breakfast it is then. Eggs, bacon, toast, no sauce. Definitely no sauce." And we shared a grim nod of understanding, a silent pact that for the foreseeable future, our diet would consist strictly of beige, non-viscous foods that resembled nothing of the human interior. We ordered our safe, dry breakfasts and sat there waiting, the conversation struggling to take flight because every topic seemed to lead back to the incident. We couldn't talk about the weekend plans because that involved the bedroom. We couldn't talk about food because that was dangerous territory. And we couldn't talk about how we were feeling because the answer was mortified. So we ended up talking about the weather and the local sports team, with the polite distance of two coworkers sharing an elevator. But the tension wasn't just about the embarrassment, it was about the shift in dynamic, because before last night, Dave was this cool, collected, slightly mysterious guy, and now I had seen him in his most vulnerable, panic state, holding a soiled instrument like a confused toddler, and you can't unsee that, you can't unring that bell. I wondered if he was thinking the same thing about me. If he was looking at me and seeing the girl who frantically scraped a mattress with a toothbrush, if the mystery was gone for him too, replaced by the stark, unglamorous reality of bodily functions. Our food arrived, and we ate in relative silence, the clinking of forks against plates filling the space where our banter used to be, and I started to spiral, thinking, is this it? Is this how we break up? Not with a fight, but with a poop disaster that renders us unable to make eye contact. I chewed my toast mechanically, feeling the dry crumbs stick in my throat, deciding that I had to break the ice. I had to acknowledge the horror, or it would consume us. "So," I started, trying to keep my voice casual, "do you think the mattress is dry yet?" Dave stopped chewing, a piece of bacon halfway to his mouth, and looked at me, his eyes wide, and for a second I thought I had made a mistake, that I had poked the bear, but then the corner of his mouth twitched, just a tiny bit, a microspasm of amusement. "If it's not," he said slowly, "I'm burning the apartment down and moving to Nepal to live as a goat herder." And just like that, the dam broke. I let out a snort of laughter, unladylike and loud, and he started chuckling too, a low rumble that grew into a full-blown laugh, and suddenly we were both laughing hysterically in the middle of the diner, tears streaming down our faces, people staring at us like we were maniacs. But we didn't care because the relief was so overwhelming, so physical, that it felt like shedding a heavy skin. We laughed until our sides hurt, until we were wheezing, laughing at the absurdity, the horror, the sheer scale of the mess, the look on his face, the look on my face, the tragic fate of the sheets. "It looked like a crime scene," I gasped, wiping tears from my eyes. "It looked like a chocolate factory exploded," and Dave shook his head, grinning. "I thought I was dying. I thought my body had turned against me. I was ready to write a will." The laughter cleansed us. It sanitized the memory, taking the power away from the shame and turning it into a story. A terrible, disgusting story, but our story, something that bonded us in the trenches of humiliation. We finished our breakfast with a renewed sense of camaraderie, feeling like war buddies who had survived a particularly gruesome battle, and walked back to the apartment with a lighter step, ready to face the aftermath. When we got back, the apartment still smelled faintly of lemon and regret, but it wasn't as oppressive as before. We went to the dryer, pulled out the sheets, which were now hot, crisp, and mercifully white, checking them obsessively for any lingering shadows of the stain, holding them up to the light like diamond inspectors, and finding them miraculously clean, a testament to the power of modern detergent and desperation. We went to the bedroom, touched the mattress spot, which was dry but stiff, the foam having hardened slightly from the soap, creating a permanent crater that would forever mark the spot of the landing. We remade the bed together, snapping the fitted sheet over the corners, smoothing out the duvet, reclaiming the space, and as we placed the pillows back, Dave grabbed me and pulled me into a hug, burying his face in my neck, and whispered, "Let's never, ever do that again without a written plan, a safety briefing, and a tarp." And I laughed, hugging him back, promising, "Deal. Next time we stick to the menu, no secret menu items." We spent the rest of the day lazy and recovering, watching movies and napping, but avoiding any activity, because, frankly, the equipment was out of order and the factory was closed for renovations. However, as evening approached, a new problem arose, a psychological hurdle I hadn't anticipated. I needed to use the bathroom, specifically for number 2, and suddenly, the simple act of digestion felt like a betrayal. I held it in for hours, terrified that any association with backdoor activities would trigger a flashback for Dave if he even heard the flush, so I found myself sneaking around my own boyfriend, trying to time my bathroom breaks for when he was listening to music or doing the dishes. It was ridiculous. I knew it was ridiculous, but the trauma was deep. Eventually, I had to go, and I sat there in the bathroom, staring at the tiles, thinking about how fragile human dignity is, how we walk around in suits and dresses, acting important, while carrying around inside of us the potential for absolute chaos. I washed my hands for 5 minutes afterwards, feeling like Lady Macbeth, trying to scrub away the memory. When I came out, Dave was on the couch, scrolling through his phone, and he looked up at me with a weird expression. "Hey," he said, "I was just reading about, how to prevent that," and I froze. He was researching. He was looking for solutions. And I asked, terrified of the answer. "Apparently," he said, looking very serious, "diet plays a big role. Maybe no more spicy Mexican food before experimentation." I nodded solemnly. Agreed. From now on, before any new adventures, we eat nothing but rice and ice cubes for 24 hours. We laughed again, but it was a nervous laugh, because we both knew that we had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had stared back, and it looked like a chocolate popsicle. We thought we were in the clear. We thought that the great cleanup of Saturday night was the final chapter in this saga of humiliation, but as anyone who has ever dealt with a biological hazard knows, the aftermath often has a half-life that lasts much longer than the event itself. We decided to go to bed early that night, mostly because we were emotionally exhausted from the roller coaster of shame and laughter, and we climbed into our freshly made bed with the crisp white sheets, feeling a sense of victory, like we had successfully reclaimed our territory from the forces of chaos. We lay there in the dark, watching the shadows from the streetlights play on the ceiling, and for the first 20 minutes, everything was fine, peaceful even, a return to the domestic bliss we had taken for granted before the incident. But then, physics and chemistry began to conspire against us once more, specifically the thermodynamics of body heat interacting with memory foam that had been impregnated with a mixture of organic matter and dish soap. As our bodies warmed up the mattress, the heat began to penetrate down into the foam layers, down into the secret depths where the stain had retreated, and slowly, insidiously, a scent began to rise. It wasn't the overpowering punch-in-the-face smell from the night before. No, this was something more subtle, more sinister, a warm, damp, musty odor that smelled like a wet dog had rolled in a taco salad and then dried off in a sauna. I sniffed the air tentatively, hoping it was just my imagination, hoping it was a phantom smell created by my traumatized brain, but then I felt Dave stiffen beside me, his breathing pausing in that telltale way that meant he had detected the intruder too. "Do you smell that?" he whispered into the darkness, his voice tight with dread, and I closed my eyes, wishing I could teleport to another dimension. "Yes," I whispered back, "it smells like warm regret." We both lay there for another minute, in denial, trying to ignore it, trying to convince ourselves that we could just sleep through it, but the smell was persistent. It was rising up from beneath us like a vengeful spirit, enveloping us in a cloud of reminder. It became clear that while we had cleaned the surface, the core of the reactor was still active, and every time we lay on that spot, our body heat would reactivate the dormant enzymes, releasing the ghost of the burrito to haunt us for eternity. Dave threw the covers off with a groan of frustration, sitting up and turning on the lamp, his face a mask of defeat. "I can't do it," he said, rubbing his eyes. "I can't sleep on a bed that smells like my own mistakes. It's psychological torture." I sat up too, nodding in agreement, because he was right. This wasn't just a smell, it was a symbol, and you can't build a healthy relationship on a foundation of fecal-scented foam. "We need a new mattress," I stated, the words hanging in the air like a financial death sentence, because we were both broke college students, or close enough to it, and mattresses are items that cost money we didn't really have, but the alternative was sleeping on a biohazard. "We do," Dave agreed, looking at the bed with a mixture of hatred and betrayal. "We have to burn this one and get a new one, immediately, tomorrow." So, we spent a second night on the leather couch, which was now beginning to feel like our permanent residence. Our backs aching, our spirits dampened, but at least the air was fresh. The next morning was Sunday, and instead of a lazy brunch or a walk in the park, our mission was clear: Operation New Bed. We drove to the nearest mattress superstore, a massive warehouse building with banners screaming "Clearance" and "Sleep like a King," which felt ironic considering we had been sleeping like medieval peasants on a rock-hard sofa. We walked in, and immediately, the atmosphere was overwhelming, rows upon rows of pristine, white, rectangular islands of comfort, bathed in fluorescent light, guarded by salespeople who circled like sharks sensing blood in the water. We had barely taken 3 steps when a sales associate intercepted us, a man with a smile so bright it looked painful and a name tag that read Gary, Sleep Architect. "Welcome, folks," Gary boomed, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Are we looking to upgrade our sleep experience today?" Dave and I exchanged a nervous glance, a silent communication of stick to the story, because we had agreed in the car that under no circumstances would we tell Gary the truth about why we were replacing our current mattress. "Yes," Dave said, his voice slightly higher than usual, "we need a new mattress. Our old one is just old." Gary nodded sympathetically, clasping his hands together. "I understand, they lose their support over time. What kind of issues are you having? Sagging? Lumps? Back pain?" I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my back. "Sagging," I blurted out, perhaps a little too quickly. "Terrible sagging. Like a hammock. Bad for the spine." Gary tooted, shaking his head. "The silent killer of sleep. Well, you've come to the right place. Do you have a preference? Memory foam, spring, hybrid?" The mention of memory foam made both of us flinch visibly, a synchronized spasm of trauma that Gary definitely noticed, but politely ignored. "No memory foam," Dave said firmly, almost aggressively. "We want springs. Lots of springs. Airflow. We need airflow." I nodded vigorously. "Yes, breathable. Very breathable. Easy to clean." I immediately regretted adding "easy to clean," because Gary's eyebrows shot up. "Easy to clean? Do you have pets? Children?" We froze. This was the danger zone. If we said yes, he might recommend specific covers. If we said no, he might ask why we were so concerned with cleaning. "We drink a lot of coffee in bed," Dave improvised, a stroke of genius. "We are clumsy coffee drinkers. Spillages happen." Gary laughed, a hearty, practiced salesman laugh. "Ah, the Sunday morning brew. I get it. Well, let me show you the Cloud Rest Hybrid. It has a cooling gel layer and a stain-resistant top cover." He led us deeper into the maze of beds, and I felt like an imposter, a criminal walking among innocent civilians. We were the people who had defiled a mattress, and here we were, pretending to be normal coffee-spilling citizens. Gary stopped at a large, fluffy-looking mattress and gestured for us to try it. "Go on," he encouraged. "Give it a test drive. You have to lay on it for at least 10 minutes to know if it's the one." This was the part one had been dreading. Laying down on a bed in public is awkward enough, but doing it with your partner while a stranger watches you, knowing that the last time you were horizontal together it ended in a catastrophe, added a whole new layer of weirdness. We gingerly sat on the edge of the bed, rigid as boards. Lay back, lay back. Gary urged, get comfortable. Assume your natural sleeping positions. I slowly lowered myself onto the mattress, keeping my legs straight and my arms crossed over my chest like a vampire in a coffin, while Dave did the same on his side. We stared up at the warehouse ceiling, lights buzzing, while Gary stood at the foot of the bed, staring at us. How does that feel? Gary asked. Firm, Dave said. Good. Supportive, I added. Nice. The silence stretched. I could feel Gary waiting for us to roll over, to cuddle, to do normal couple things to test the bed, but we were paralyzed by the fear that if we relaxed too much, we might somehow jinx this bed too, or worse, that Gary possessed X-ray vision and could see the stains on our soles. You know, Gary said, stepping closer, a lot of couples find that motion isolation is key. If one person moves, the other shouldn't feel it. Why don't you try rolling around a bit? Rolling around was a trigger phrase. I saw Dave's eye twitch. We're good, Dave said. We don't move much. We sleep like logs. Stationary logs. Gary looked a bit confused by our stiffness, but pivoted to his next selling point. Well, this one also comes with a 10-year warranty. Covers manufacturing defects, sagging greater than 1.5 inches. He trailed off, then added, of course, the warranty is void if there are any stains. You have to use a protector. The word stain hit us like a physical blow. We'll take the protector, I said instantly, sitting up. The best one you have. Waterproof. Hazmat grade if possible. Gary chuckled, thinking I was joking. We have a waterproof encasement that seals the entire mattress. Dust mite proof, liquid proof. We'll take 2, Dave said, deadly serious. 1 for the mattress and 1 backup. Gary blinked, probably wondering what kind of violent coffee drinking we were engaging in, but he smelled a commission, so he didn't push it. We ended up buying the mattress, not because it was the most comfortable, but because we just wanted to get out of there before Gary asked any more questions about our lifestyle. The transaction was swift, but then came the logistical nightmare. Delivery. We can deliver it Tuesday, Gary said, typing on his computer. And we can haul away your old mattress for a small fee of $50. My heart stopped. Haul away the old mattress. That meant 2 strangers coming into our apartment, entering the bedroom, lifting the sheets, and seeing the shadow of the incident on the bare foam. They would see the stain. They might even smell the warm regret. There was absolutely no way we could let professional movers handle the evidence. No, Dave shouted, a little too loud, causing a family in the pillow section to look over. I mean, no thanks. We'll handle the old one ourselves. Gary looked surprised. Are you sure? It's a heavy item. Most people prefer the haul-away service. We have a truck, Dave lied. We did not have a truck. We had a Honda Civic. And we promised it to a friend. A friend? Gary asked. You're giving a sagging, old mattress to a friend? He has back problems. I improvised wildly. He likes sagging mattresses. It counteracts the curvature of his spine. It's medical. Gary looked at us like we were aliens who had just landed and were trying to understand human furniture concepts, but he just shrugged. Suit yourselves. Sign here. We fled the store with our receipt, the promise of a delivery on Tuesday, and a new problem: how to dispose of a biological hazard mattress by ourselves without a truck and without getting arrested for illegal dumping. We got back to the car and just sat there for a moment, the adrenaline fading. We have to rent a van, Dave said, staring out the windshield. And we have to wrap the old mattress in plastic before we take it out of the apartment. If the neighbors see us carrying a stained mattress down the stairs, I will have to fake my own kidnapping. Plastic wrap. I nodded, making a mental list. Industrial strength. And duct tape. We need to make it look like a body bag, but rectangular. The absurdity of the situation hit me again. We were planning a disposal operation that rivaled a mob hit, all because of a burrito and a bad decision. Where do we take it? I asked. The dump? Yeah, Dave sighed. The city dump. On a Sunday. This is my life now. I'm a mattress smuggler. We spent the rest of the afternoon sourcing a rental van and buying rolls of heavy-duty plastic wrap from a hardware store, where the cashier definitely judged us for buying what looked like a serial killer starter pack. Back at the apartment, the mood was tense as we prepared for the extraction. We entered the bedroom like a SWAT team, armed with the plastic and tape. The smell was still there, lingering, mocking us. "Okay," Dave said, pulling on a pair of rubber gloves. Where he got them, I don't know, but I appreciated the safety consciousness. "Let's wrap this thing up and get it out of here." We lifted the mattress, which was heavier and floppier than I expected, and it was like wrestling a giant, dead marshmallow. We wrapped it round and round with the plastic, the sound of the screeching tape filling the room, sealing in the smell, sealing in the shame. We created a silver, plastic-wrapped monolith that looked incredibly suspicious, but at least it was sealed. Now came the hard part, getting it down 3 flights of stairs without killing ourselves or alerting the neighbors. We opened the apartment door and peeked out. The coast was clear. "Go, go, go," Dave whispered, and we hoisted the monstrosity up. It was awkward, heavy, and slippery. We stumbled to the stairwell, maneuvering the corners, grunting and sweating. On the second-floor landing, disaster nearly struck. Mrs. Higgins, our elderly neighbor who watches everyone like a hawk, opened her door to put out her trash. We froze, holding the mattress suspended in midair. She looked at us, then at the giant plastic-wrapped slab. "Moving out?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "Just spring cleaning," I squeaked from behind the mattress. "Getting rid of the old, bringing in the new." Mrs. Higgins sniffed the air. "I prayed the plastic was airtight." "Smells like bleach," she commented. "We're very hygienic," Dave shouted, panic making his voice crack. "Have a nice day, Mrs. Higgins." We rushed down the last flight of stairs, practically throwing the mattress into the back of the rental van, slamming the doors shut, and jumping into the front seats like we had just robbed a bank. As Dave started the engine, we both let out a hysterical breath. "We did it," he said. "It's contained." But as we drove toward the city dump, I couldn't help but wonder, what if the dump guys ask questions? What if they unwrap it to check for recyclables? The paranoia was deep, but at least we were moving forward. We were driving into the sunset with a soiled mattress in the back, ready to bury our past and start fresh. The drive to the city dump was the longest 45 minutes of my life, a tense, silent pilgrimage through the suburbs where every bump in the road made me wince, imagining the plastic-wrapped bundle in the back shifting or tearing, releasing its secrets into the rental van which we would then have to pay to fumigate. Dave drove with both hands gripping the wheel at 10 and 2, staring straight ahead like he was piloting a spacecraft through an asteroid field, his knuckles white, his jaw set, and I sat in the passenger seat clutching the rental agreement like it was a holy scripture that could protect us from the judgment of the sanitation workers. The paranoia I had felt earlier was now evolving into a full-blown conspiracy theory, where I was convinced that the police were going to pull us over for a broken taillight, ask to check the back, see the suspiciously body-shaped package, and we would end up on the evening news as the Burrito Bandits, or something equally mortifying. "Do you think they have cameras at the dump?" I asked, breaking the silence, my voice trembling slightly. Dave glanced at me, his eyes wide.
"Why?"
"Why would they have cameras?" "To catch illegal dumpers," I whispered. "To catch people disposing of hazardous materials." "It's a mattress," Dave insisted, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself more than me. "It's just a mattress. People throw away mattresses every day. It's a standard household item." "Not like this," I countered. "Not wrapped in 3 layers of industrial plastic and duct tape like a mob hit." "We look guilty, Dave. We look so guilty." We spent the rest of the drive rehearsing our story, refining the friend with a bad back narrative, adding details about how the friend moved to Canada and couldn't take the mattress with him, building a complex backstory for a piece of furniture that was currently fermenting in the cargo hold. When we finally saw the sign for the municipal waste transfer station, my stomach did a flip that had nothing to do with the bumpy road. The entrance was a grim, dusty gate with a small booth manned by a guy who looked like he had been carved out of granite and hadn't smiled since the mid-90s. He was wearing a high-visibility vest that had seen better days and was chewing on a toothpick with an intensity that was frankly intimidating. Dave rolled down the window, putting on his best innocent citizen face. "Hi there," Dave said, his voice cracking a little. "Just here to drop off a mattress." The gatekeeper looked at Dave, then leaned forward to peer into the back of the van, his eyes narrowing behind a pair of scratched safety glasses. "Just a mattress?" he grunted. "That's it." "Yep," Dave nodded vigorously. "Just one mattress. Queen size." The man stared at us for a long, uncomfortable moment, clearly sensing the nervous energy radiating off us like heat waves. "That'll be $20, he said finally, holding out a gloved hand. I scrambled to find the cash, shoving a $20 bill at Dave, who passed it to the man with shaking fingers. The gate arm lifted slowly, creaking like a rusty gate to the underworld, and we drove through, breathing a collective sigh of relief that we hadn't been interrogated or arrested. We followed the signs to the residential drop-off zone, which was essentially a giant concrete pit filled with the detritus of modern life: broken chairs, crushed boxes, old tires, and bags of unidentifiable garbage. The smell was intense, a sour, metallic tang that usually would have made me wrinkle my nose, but honestly, compared to the scent of regret we had been living with, it smelled like roses. We backed the van up to the edge of the pit, where a few other people were unloading their junk, moving with the casual indifference of people who hadn't committed a crime against hygiene. "Okay," Dave said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Let's do this. Quick and dirty. In and out." We jumped out of the van, ran to the back doors, and threw them open. There it was, the silver monolith, shining in the harsh sunlight of the dump. We grabbed the ends, counting 1, 2, 3, and heaved it out, shuffling towards the concrete precipice. It was heavy, dead weight, and for a split second, as we swung it back and forth to get momentum, I felt a pang of sadness. This mattress had seen us at our best, and it had seen us at our absolute worst. It had been a vessel of comfort, and we had destroyed it with our hubris. "Heave," Dave shouted, and we let go. The mattress sailed through the air, turning slowly, the sun glinting off the plastic wrap, before crashing down onto a pile of broken drywall and black garbage bags with a satisfying thud. We stood there for a second, looking down at it, lying there among the ruins, looking strangely small and insignificant now that it was no longer in our bedroom. "Goodbye," I whispered. "I'm sorry we failed you." Dave put his arm around me. "It's in a better place now," he said solemnly. "Or, at least, a place that smells equally bad." We turned and practically ran back to the van, jumping in and peeling out of the drop-off zone like we were escaping a burning building. As we drove back towards the city, the tension in the car finally evaporated, replaced by a feeling of lightness, of freedom. The evidence was gone. The smell was gone. We were free. "We need to eat," Dave said suddenly, as the adrenaline crash hit us. "But nothing spicy. Nothing brown. Nothing that resembles anything." "Chicken nuggets," I suggested instantly.
"Bland, beef, safe chicken nuggets."
"Perfect," he agreed. We stopped at a drive-thru and ordered an obscene amount of nuggets and fries, eating them in the parking lot with the voracious appetite of survivors. We laughed about the dump guy. We laughed about the plastic wrap. We laughed about Mrs. Higgins, finding the humor in the absolute absurdity of the last 48 hours. We returned the rental van, walked back to our apartment, and opened the door to a home that felt different, cleaner, lighter, purged. The bedroom was empty, just a bed frame standing there like a skeleton, but it didn't look sad anymore. It looked like a blank canvas, a fresh start. We slept on the couch one last time that night, but it didn't bother us because we knew salvation was coming in the morning. Tuesday arrived, and with it, the delivery truck from the mattress store. We watched from the window as the delivery guys hauled the new mattress up the stairs, wrapped in clear factory plastic, pristine, white, untouched by human error. They brought it into the room, placed it on the frame, and cut away the plastic, revealing the Cloudrest hybrid in all its glory. It looked like a giant marshmallow, inviting and pure. As soon as the delivery guys left, we didn't jump on it. We didn't test the bounce. We didn't dive in. No, we went straight to the bag we had bought from Gary. The protector. We opened the package and unfolded the waterproof, dust mite proof, everything proof encasement, which felt less like a sheet and more like a high-tech space suit. We wrestled the mattress into the casing, zipping it up tight, sealing the virgin foam inside a fortress of impermeability. Then, and only then, did we put on the sheets, new sheets, by the way, because we had thrown the old ones out too just to be safe. We stood back and admired our work. It was a fortress of sleep, a sanctuary of safety. "It's beautiful," Dave said, wiping a tear from his eye, fake, but felt real. "It's safe." That night, we climbed into bed, and the feeling of a proper mattress after 3 nights on a leather couch was indescribable. It was like floating on a cloud. We lay there in the dark, holding hands, staring at the ceiling. "Hey," Dave whispered. "Yeah, I love you. I love you too. But," he added, "if you ever suggest we try the back door again without a signed affidavit, a fasting period, and a tarp, I'm breaking up with you." I laughed, squeezing his hand.
Deal.
The back door is permanently closed for renovations. Indefinitely. We fell asleep, peaceful and dreamless, safe in the knowledge that we had survived the chocolate popsicle incident of 2024. And while we still can't look at a Klondike bar without flinching, and we avoid the frozen dessert aisle at the grocery store like the plague, we learned a valuable lesson that week. We learned that love isn't just about romance and candles and smooth jazz. Sometimes love is scrubbing a mattress at 2 a.m. with dish soap. Sometimes love is renting a van to dispose of biological evidence. Sometimes love is looking at your partner, covered in sweat and shame, and realizing that if you can get through this, you can get through anything. But mostly, we learned that preparation is key, and that some doors are better left locked, especially after burrito dinner. So, to anyone watching this who is thinking about being spontaneous, thinking about skipping the prep work, thinking it'll be fine, it's just like the movies, take it from me. It is not like the movies. The movies don't show the cleanup. The movies don't show the trip to the dump. Do your research. Buy the supplies. And for the love of God, check the menu before you go out for dinner. Because you never know when a romantic night in might turn into a hazmat situation, and trust me, you do not want to be the one holding the popsicle when the lights turn on. Stay safe, stay prepared, and keep your mattresses covered, folks.
Peace.